Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordan. Welcome to today's video, which is another Aardvark reading vlog. One of my favorite series I do on my channel is reading all of the Aardvark books that I collect. I'm not sponsored by Aardvark. They don't ask me to make any type of video like this or anything. I am a regular paying member who subscribes with my own account. I pay for my own books. But I do have an affiliate code linked down below, so if you want to try your first box for Aardvark, I believe the code gets your first one for only $4. I honestly just really enjoy their service. I really enjoy the books that they pick, and I love doing reading vlogs like this to keep myself on top of the books that I collect and get some reviews out to anybody else who is either a member of Aardvark looking for books to add on to their future boxes or deciding which of their picks to prioritize, or anybody else, even if you're not an Aardvark member. Obviously you can pick up these books anywhere else. So this vlog will feature 5 of my most recent Aardvark picks. I'm very excited about them. We've got a pretty wide range of genres and a lot of books that I am specifically very excited about. So to get right into the books that I will be reading in this video, first we've got The Memory Collectors by Diet Meserve. This is a sci-fi book about 4 friends who time travel, I think, but then something weird happens where they get stuck on the same day in the past. I don't know. I love sci-fi, I love time travel, I love time loops. So I have high hopes for this book. Then we've got a couple of romances that I've picked up recently. We've got Left of Forever by Tara DeWitt. I believe this one is a second chance romance, which is a subgenre within romance that I do tend to really enjoy. I have not read from this author before, but I've heard good things. So also obviously excited about that one. The other romance book that I've got is Sounds Like Love by Ashley Poston. Ashley Poston, on the other hand, is an author that I have read from a lot before. I believe I've read all of her previous books. Yes, she's written 3 before this. I've read all of them. I've enjoyed all of them. I think I've given them all either 3 or 4 stars. So I would love a 5-star from this author, but even if it lands in that 3-4 star range, I do generally have a lot of fun with her books. And I don't know specifically what this one is about, so I'm looking forward to figuring that out because she does tend to sprinkle in some unique, kind of surreal or speculative elements into her romances. Then the next one is dipping into horror a little bit, which is not a genre I read a ton of, but I've been seeing a lot of buzz about Lucky Day by Chuck Tingle. I believe this is a horror book that seems like it kind of has a sci-fi element to it, where this day happens to everybody on Earth, where there's all kinds of low probability events that kills a whole bunch of people, and we're following a main character who is able to find connections with all of them or something like that. I don't know, I've heard great things about Chuck Tingle as an author. I have not tried out his books before, but this plot and how this book has been described sounds the most up my alley out of any of his books. So very excited to see if that one could be for me. And then last but not least, we've got my most recent Aardvark pick, which I just picked at the beginning of October, and it's called All of Us Murderers by KJ Charles. I have not heard of this book before. I have not heard of this author before. This book was not on my radar at all, but I definitely was intrigued by the cover. Very perfect for spooky season in my opinion. And if I remember right, the buzzwords that Aardvark put for this book was murder mystery, historical fiction, gothic feeling, and LGBTQIA characters. So all of those things sound like they're my vibe. And let's see, the very top of the synopsis says, "Who will survive Lackaday House? When Zeb Witham is summoned to a wealthy relative's remote gothic manor, he is horrified to find all the people he least wants to see in the world. His estranged brother, his sneering cousin, and his bitter ex-lover Gideon Gray. Things couldn't possibly get any worse." Then the master of the house announces the true purpose of the gathering. He intends to leave the vast family fortune to whomever marries his young ward, setting off a violent scramble for her hand. Zeb wants no part of his greedy family, but when he tries to leave, the way is barred. The walls of Lackaday House are high and the gates are firmly locked. As the Dartmoor mists roll in, there's no way out, and something unnatural may be watching them from the house's shadowy depths. So again, I think October is the perfect time to read a book like this, and I'm kind of going out on a whim, being that I have no preconceived notions and haven't heard anything about it, but I'm excited to give it a try. So all of those will be jam-packed into today's vlog. So I will just be back with an update once I have finished each of the books. And I'll come back with a little bit better of a synopsis, in my own words, what each of these books is about once I finish them. And then of course, let you know my thoughts, my rating, my review, and who I would recommend each of these books to. So if that sounds good to you, stay tuned and we'll get into it. Okay, I finished my first book. I finished Lucky Day, and this was a quick one, which is good. Definitely a good way to like jumpstart my momentum for this vlog. And despite how short this book was, I feel like I have a lot to say about it. I think I mentioned in the intro that I have not read any Chuck Tingle before, but I have heard his name. I've heard many reviews on a few of his books. It looks like he has 3, I think, traditionally published, more like young adult horror type of books before this one. And then I do know he writes quite a lot of erotic stories that I don't think are like traditionally published, but he publishes, I don't know, through his Patreon or Amazon or other places. I have not read any of those books. I don't think they're for me. And I didn't really think any of his previous books were for me either. But this particular premise of this book sounded really up my alley. So I wanted to give it a try to see if he is the type of writer that I could enjoy other books from. And I am glad I gave it a try because I did enjoy a lot of this. And it also reminded me of a lot of other things that I've loved. But first, let me talk about the premise. So in this book, we follow our main character named Vera, and she is a professor of like statistics and probability. And she's a really interesting character. She actually reminded me of the main character from Happiness Falls, which maybe I'll pop up a picture of that book, but that's one of my all-time favorite books. And I love how analytical that main character is. I saw a lot of the same traits in this main character. She just naturally is an extremely analytical, logical person. And I really liked being in her head at the very beginning of this book and getting all of her internal thoughts. We also learn about this main character at the start that she is in a relationship. She is actually engaged to a woman and they're going out to celebrate something and her mom is invited. And her mom does not approve of her same-sex relationship. So like right from the start of this book, we get a really good glimpse into who this main character is, what she loves in her life, what basically grounds her and roots her and makes her happy. And all of that is thrown out the window really quickly when this thing happens to the entire world. And they call it in this book the low probability event, which is basically one singular day when the strangest things start happening all over the world and a whole bunch of people die. Like millions and millions of people die on a single day. Like how many million? 8 million people die. And it's such strange things that verge on impossible that like, okay, if one of them happened, it'd be a really weird freak accident, but all of them happening on the same day is very suspicious. But it's things like, I think it was like an ape or a chimpanzee or something breaking out of the zoo and rampaging down a busy street and killing a whole bunch of people. And then also at the same time, fish start falling out of the sky because some weird weather pattern dragged them up from the ocean, carried them across, and now they're raining in one spot of town and literally landing on people and killing them. And then a lot of like Final Destination type objects flying into buildings or down the street and stabbing people right through their eyeballs. Like, very strange things with very vivid, gory descriptions is what all of a sudden takes over this book. And that part felt very similar to A Quiet Place Day One, and also kind of Final Destination, like I just said, because it was just like one thing after another. Everything turns into chaos and you're following the main character through that event. Obviously, she does survive that day. And from that day forward, everyone is forever changed. Like the entire world is completely different than it was before. It has had to rebuild a lot of these big cities. It did disproportionately affect America, which is interesting, and that's covered in this book. But there's a lot of rebuilding that the world has to go through. And Vera, basically her whole life was blown up. Not only because she loses some people in her life, but also because she is a statistics and probability professor, and this day is not able to be explained with logic and statistics and probability that she has spent her whole life studying. So she goes into a deep, deep depression. And then basically the rest of this book is her being contacted by somebody who is looking to figure this day out. So that's what she spends the rest of the book doing. And man, my enjoyment of this book was kind of a roller coaster. Like I was really in it to begin with. Super intrigued by this main character, like I said. I was personally really into the day itself, and all of the horrific descriptions of what was happening was really entertaining. And then it kind of lulled for a while, which was kind of on purpose with the book. And then it started picking back up, and then it just got to a point that like this book gets a little weird. It gets a little abstract, and it does explain a lot of what happens, but it kind of lost me towards the end. So like I was back in it, but then right at the very end I was like, okay, I don't really get it, and I don't really think I'm going to get it. So I don't really know where to land as far as my enjoyment and rating of this book. I think 3 stars feels right because it was such a roller coaster. 3 stars is kind of, you know, the average of all of that. And will I read more Chuck Tingle after this? I really don't know. I think I will just keep an eye out for what else he publishes, especially in this kind of horror realm. And if he has more books in the future that kind of teeter on that sci-fi horror line, then I would potentially give him another try, but I still don't think he's totally the author for me. Just with how this book ended up and how it was explained and everything, I just don't think it totally clicked with me as a reader. Plus his other more straightforward horror books I think are just not quite the genre that I align that closely with either. So yeah, this was a weird one, and I will be very interested to see and hear more people's reviews for this book because it just came out somewhat recently. I'm sure I will see more of them in the next couple of months. But yeah, it was really strange. The other comparison I wanted to make to this book was a book I read recently called Dr. No by Percival Everett. And this book didn't totally work for me, but what I did enjoy about this book was that it studied the concept of nothing, or it followed a main character who was a professor who studied the concept of nothing. And that was just a little bit fascinating to me. And this book also kind of covers the topic of nothing. And so I just found that interesting that it reminded me so much of that book and those other pieces of media that I mentioned. For being such a unique book, I would say this is really unique. It did remind me of an awful lot of other things, which is also interesting in itself. I definitely don't think that's a bad thing, and I don't think it copied anything at all. I just found it very interesting that it reminded me to a lot of other things that mostly I have otherwise enjoyed. Even more so makes me feel like I should have loved this, but for some reason, something else just was a little missing. But I am glad to have read this book and to have tried out Chuck Tingle. And I'm very ready to get on to the next book for this video. So I'm gonna do that, and I'll be back with my next update when I have it. Okay, I have finished my next book. I was kind of in the mood for a romance, so I went ahead and finished Sounds Like Love by Ashley Poston, and I had a pretty good time. I've had a good time with all of Ashley Poston's books. They have all either been 3 stars or 4 stars, so I've been generally satisfied. I've had a good time, but I haven't absolutely loved any of them, especially as much as I know some people have really loved her first 2 books, The Dead Romantics and The 7-Year Slip. But she is an author that I probably will keep up with for a while because her premises are intriguing and they're unique enough that I personally feel like they're worth reading as long as I'm still generally enjoying them. This one is about 2 musicians falling in love. Our female main character is a songwriter, and she's written some really successful songs for this female pop star. So she's like famous adjacent, which is kind of fun. And then the male main character is a boy band pop star type person is what I get from him. And at the start of this book, they have kind of a meet cute where they're both at a show of that female pop stars that I mentioned our female main character writes songs for and with. Basically our 2 love interest main characters are both watching that concert in this private balcony together, and they share a cute like kiss cam type of moment. But they kind of leave that night assuming they're never going to see each other again. Especially our female main character kind of assumes like, okay, that was a fun one night, but this guy isn't gonna want anything to do with me. Like, he's gonna be off living his pop star life. Then flash forward a little bit and things happen that bring those characters back together again. And that's where the kind of speculative element of this book comes in. So if you're not familiar with Ashley Poston, each of her books are basically contemporary romances. They're set in the real world, but there's one little speculative or magical element to them that just adds a little twist to the book. And I'm sure it says in the synopsis what it is, Yeah, it kind of does. However, I personally thought it was fun to discover that as I was reading the book. I expected there to be kind of a magical element to it, but I didn't know what specifically it would be in this book. And I kind of liked the surprise and the process of learning what that is kind of at the same time as the main character. So I won't say what it is specifically. I will just say that that also exists in this book. And to me, this book was just fun. I had a good time. There are some kind of deeper elements within this book. This main character is dealing with some family issues specifically, and a lot of this book is her kind of moving home to deal with some of those family matters. So there definitely is some substance here, and there are things that go a little bit beyond surface level. But to me personally, I found this more to just be kind of a lighthearted, breeze through it type of read that I had a good time with, but is not a new favorite by any means. So I do think I would recommend it if you've enjoyed Ashley Poston's books in the past. However, I don't think this is going to hit as hard as especially her first two books. I don't know, maybe it will. I haven't actually looked at any other reviews of this book yet to see if people are connecting on that deeper level, but I personally did not quite get to that point. So I'm going to land at 3 stars. The other kind of last thing I'll say about this is like the music element of this book. I would say there is a very strong musical component. That's especially what brings the two love interests together, is working on a song together. I will also say though that I was kind of hoping there would be more related to the business and the music industry and like our main character's career as a songwriter. That is something that I find really interesting. I think of like Amy Allen, who is a real life songwriter for really huge popular artists. I've watched interviews of her talking about her process and her love for that career. So I was hoping to see a little bit more of that in here, but because the main character is moving home, specifically away from LA for such a large portion of this book, we don't get that. We just get her focusing on like one specific project rather than the career as a whole. So that's something I was just personally hoping we would get a little more of, but I thought I would mention kind of what the vibe is, because I know some people have some pretty strong feelings about reading books about famous people or people in the music industry. I'd say it does focus on the music and the song itself, but it doesn't focus so much on what it's like to be like living in Hollywood, being a musical career person. So yeah, I'm landing at 3 stars. I did enjoy it. I had a fun time, but overall not a new favorite or anything like that. But I am still in a romance mood, so I'm thinking I'm gonna move on to Left of Forever and hope that that one can scratch my itch a little bit more and I can find a book that I enjoy a little bit more than 3 stars. But we'll see. I'll be back once I finish that book and when I have my next update. Okay, another day, another finished book. And I've got some great news because I just finished Left of Forever and I am obsessed with this book. I loved this so much. And it's not that surprising because on paper, this is exactly what I love in romance books. This is a second chance romance between two characters who are now divorced, or at the start of the book, they were divorced. And they've got a ton of history together because they have been friends since they were 5 years old. And then they ended up getting pregnant and having a baby when they were teenagers. And then they got married, and then at age 28, they got divorced. And we find out why all of that is. They went through some fertility struggles, which was really emotional to read about. And then at the time this book takes place, the main characters are now 33 years old and they have been divorced for 5 years. But obviously they are not out of each other's lives because they have a son together. They are co-parenting. And then at the start of this book, we're just getting to them at the point when they both are kind of separately having thoughts about maybe rekindling this relationship. And I just loved this for so many reasons. I mean, I do love a second chance romance, but especially between people who were married. And I also love romances that feature characters with children. They don't have to have children together for me to enjoy it, but in this case, obviously they do. But I don't know that I've ever read a book quite like this, featuring characters that have known each other since they were 5 years old. That is an entire lifetime of getting to know each other, and like their families have been intertwined this whole time. There's just so much between these main characters, and I really like how this book explores how life can get really difficult. Like I said, they faced some fertility and health struggles. They also have gone through a lot of loss in their life, and those types of things are just relentless sometimes. I can totally understand why, even if a couple is perfect for each other and perfect together, life can get really hard and it can drive people apart, even if they do love each other, even if they're made for each other. And I just thought this was really beautiful in how it dove through what drove them apart, what brought them back together. And despite this being a really emotional book, it definitely was, there was also a lot of like lightness and levity throughout the book. I thought the plot itself was really fun and interesting because at the point we're starting this book, this couple's son is moving away to college. And they decide, because their son is moving several hours away, they are going to follow him in a second car and make kind of a road trip out of this trip, bringing their son to college. And along that road trip, they end up stopping at several sort of romantic locations. And because they've already acknowledged they both might want to give this another try, like they're not totally resisting the romance that comes up throughout this trip, but also they're both being very guarded, and also there's some like funny and awkward situations that happen. So it was a very fun setup and plot supporting these characters in this really emotional book at the heart of it. It also does get quite steamy towards the end especially, so just know that. But almost immediately I figured this book was going to be 5 stars. I was immediately hooked. I was loving it every moment that I was listening to this book. I was completely drawn in and wanted to continue reading it until I finished. And after I finished, it was solidified as absolutely a 5-star book. Nearly a perfect romance for me. It reminded me a lot of Before I Let Go, which is maybe my all-time favorite romance. If not my singular favorite, it's definitely up there. So if you enjoyed this, I do think you would enjoy this, and vice versa. And this is also apparently the second book in a series, so I will absolutely be going back to read that first book in the series. I'm sure the tropes are a little bit different, so I might not end up loving it as much as this one, but I am for sure willing to give it a try. And then I did see that there's a third book slated to be released within this series, I believe next year, so I will definitely be getting my hands on that as soon as it comes out. But I am just so happy that that book lived up to my hopes and expectations for it. And so now that I've gotten my romance fix, I'm ready to dive into the sci-fi book. So I'm gonna go ahead and read The Memory Collectors next. So that will be my next update once I finish the book and have some things to share about it. Alrighty, my friends, coming at you with a car update, because apparently that's all I have time for right now. But I have to update you because I finished The Memory Collectors and I really enjoyed this book, which I'm really excited about. This on paper is such a me book. The description of it sounds so up my alley. I want to say I was super confident that I was always going to enjoy it, but sometimes those are the most disappointing books that seem like they should be completely for you, but then for some reason you end up not enjoying. But I'm excited that this lived up to my own internal hype and excitement. The plot of this book is that this is set about 3 years in the future, and by that time, basically time travel has been invented. But it's not an exact science. It's basically gotten to the point where you can sign up for this program and you will get sent back in time for 1 hour only, but you can't guarantee exactly when that time is going to be. So it's kind of a do it at your own risk type of activity. And a lot of people use it for if they've lost someone and they want to go back in time any amount to when that person was in their life. That's how they seem to get the most out of it, rather than somebody trying to go back specifically to one very certain time in their life. And the other thing is that if you go back, you'll be in that time for an hour. You don't have to do things exactly as you did them the first time around. And if you don't, nothing will be changed in the present. So there's no concern about like ruining history and like erasing yourself from the present or any sort of ripple effects like that. However, they've justified it in this book, makes it so that those implications don't exist. So this book then goes into 4 different perspectives of 4 different people who are signing up for this service and going back in time. And kind of the intrigue of the book is that we find out that these 4 characters have all been sent back to the exact same day, which is a day in 2025. And then they also end up being back in the past for longer than an hour. So the rest of this book is then kind of figuring out how these four characters are connected, because they don't necessarily seem connected off the bat, but it's one of those stories where their timelines all kind of intertwine, or their perspectives all kind of intertwine. And then there's a little bit of a kind of a mystery that comes about towards the middle that I guess you kind of end up solving by the end. So like I said, I really enjoyed this, especially like the first 3/4 I would say were my favorite. I really enjoyed honestly all of the perspectives, and then once we found out how they were connected, I was still really intrigued. Something about the ending didn't quite land as well or hit as hard as I was hoping it would. So it's not quite a 5-star book, but it is a pretty strong 4-star book for me. So I'm really happy about that. I'm glad that this lived up to my expectations. And if you're someone who has similar sci-fi tastes to me, and if time travel-y books are up your alley and this premise in general just sounds interesting to you, I do think it's worth giving a shot. And did I say I'm giving it 4 stars? I'm giving it 4 stars. So I'm happy to have 2 pretty good winners there in a row. We are now down to the final book of this video. So I am going to go ahead and read, I think it's called All of Us Murderers. And then I'll be back with that final update on that book and wrap up this video as a whole once I finish. Alrighty, my friends, it is time for the final update, and I hate to leave this video on a bad note, but I unfortunately tried to read All of Us Murderers, and I'm unfortunately going to DNF it, which is a bummer because I was very excited to give this book a try. It felt like a good mix between things that I enjoy in books, that I know I enjoy, that are somewhat comfort zone elements of books, with some things that are a little bit outside of my comfort zone. And I was hoping this would be a great way to kind of dip my toes into like a gothic type of story and a little bit of a borderline haunting type of story, but doing it within a historical fiction, LGBTQ romance type of lens that I'm already familiar and comfortable with. But unfortunately, this book just felt like it had so many elements to it that I was completely lost from the jump. I did make it to, let me check, 55% of the book. So over halfway, I did give it a really good try, but it just never gripped me. The premise of this book is that we follow our main character named Zeb, which is short for Zebedee, which is such a fun name. I love that name. And this book is told in 3rd person, so we hear the name Zeb a lot. But he has been invited to this house called Lackaday House, which is like this big private manor, really big and luxurious, and it's owned by his uncle, Zeb's uncle. And so Zeb is invited there along with like a whole bunch of his cousins. We really jump into it. We start this book with Zeb walking into the house and reconnecting with all of these family members of his. And from that point, it's very confusing because I think most of them are cousins, but there do seem to be some strained relationships. There seem to be some people that are like newer to the family than others. And they're all brought there because this uncle has invited them, and he makes this grand statement to say that ownership of this manor and like this uncle's inheritance and everything like that will be bestowed to whoever marries his daughter. And that's another sticking point to me of this book, is I'm kind of confused about how that doesn't make his daughter also related to all of the cousins here. I don't know if I just missed that explanation of how she's not blood related, so that's not weird, or if it is weird and that's just supposed to add to like the complete weirdness of this book. I don't know. But Zeb is immediately out on this prospect. One, because he doesn't really care to own this big house. He doesn't care about the riches or any of that, but especially because he's gay. So he has absolutely no interest in marrying this woman, but because of reasons, he ends up having to stay and basically take part in this weird competition amongst family. What's also strange about this book is that Zeb's ex-boyfriend named Gideon is also here. He's not related. I'm a little unclear about why he's there. I think he maybe works for the uncle or something like that, but he's also there. So we're also seeing kind of this rekindling of the relationship between Zeb and Gideon. The other last thing that I'm just not really here for is some sort of haunting situation. There have been a number of encounters that different members of this family have had throughout the house. Some of them are saying it's a ghost. Some of them are saying other weird things have happened. And I'm to the point where like, I don't care about where any of these storylines go. I don't care who ends up with the house. I don't care if Zeb ends up with Gideon. I did get through their first sex scene together, which was nice and fun, but I don't really need to see that relationship progress that much more. And I really don't care about this whole haunting situation. So sadly, I just have nothing that's keeping me reading this book. I have no storyline that I am invested in finding out the ending to. So I am landing at a DNF, which feels a bit unsatisfying, especially since this is the last book for this video. However, I do not think this video was a complete failure. I actually think it was a very big success. And I did end up with ratings kind of all over the board. I did end up with 2 3-star books, Lucky Day and Sounds Like Love. Really glad that I gave both of those a try. I ended up with a 4-star book in The Memory Collectors, which is very up my alley and will definitely be a book that I do recommend to sci-fi readers for a while to come. And then I ended up with a new romance to obsess over, a 5-star book, Left of Forever. Cannot wait to dive more into Tara DeWitt's books. And then of course, this DNF, but we're just not going to talk about that anymore. And then the very last thing I wanted to pop in with, way here at the end of the video, I'm assuming anyone still watching at this point is someone who watches, you know, all of my videos and has somewhat of a stake in what I'm reading. I did want to give an update on 2 books that I think I shared in my October TBR as books that I plan to read this month, but I'm going to give some reasons why I'm not reading them yet. So the first one is To the Moon and Back by Eliana Ramaj. This is a book that I mistakenly called an Aardvark book, but it's very clearly a book of the month book. It's the only book of the month book that I have on my shelves right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and save it for a future book of the month video once I collect a couple more book of the month books. And then one more actually Aardvark book that I definitely put on my TBR that I did not read for this video is The Once and Future Me by Melissa Pace. This, I believe, is a sci-fi mystery thriller, which I have not read yet. I do still plan to read, but I have actually now slated this into a video that will come out in November. It's a video that I am doing in collaboration with another YouTuber, so it will be a super fun time. We're actually buddy reading this book together. So you will get my thoughts on this book in November. But just in case anybody happened to watch my October TBR and be excited for me to read that book, it is now coming in November, so stay tuned for that. So I think that is all my updates to give at the end of this video. So please let me know if you have also read any of the books that I mentioned in this video. What were your thoughts? Did we agree? Did we disagree? Also let me know if I put any books onto your radar or your TBR that you want to read because of my review, or vice versa. Did you take any books off of your TBR? I would love to hear all the things, and other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.